those are sort of standard items that every VC looks for. In addition to that, I'm looking for an unusual technical insight, which could be built by a small two-pizza team, 5 people, 10 people in a room in about a year or two.
All right, this is another episode of the Form Your Own Pack podcast. My guest today is Ashmeet Sidana, and he's from Engineering Capital. So Ashmeet, how are you doing today?
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you for joining me. So first off, for people that don't know, who is Ashmeet?
We are a seed stage venture capital firm based here in Palo Alto. I'm an engineer. I call myself chief engineer, solo GP. So in many ways, you could say I am engineering capital. I am also engineering the capital, as I like to say, because we are venture capital for engineers focused on seed stage companies that are taking technical risk. This is different from market risk, which is where most VCs are focused on. And I can get into that differentiation if that's of interest.
Sure. No, yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like you started this because of that distinction. So what is the distinction there?
That's exactly right. I started it because I noticed that amongst the hundreds, or I should say thousands of venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, most of them are focused on market risk. In other words, will the customer buy the product? How much will they buy it for? How fast can I sell it to them? What's my CAC ratio, sales efficiency, etc.? It turns out that there is a small subset of companies or opportunities where that's not the interesting question. The interesting question is, we know they want to buy it. We know they're willing to pay lots of money for it, but we don't know how to build it. Nobody's figured out how to really build it. And that's the part of the companies and that's the part of the ecosystem that I focus on.
So that's very interesting because I think, we probably all acknowledge in the last 10 to 15 years, maybe 10 being the most, like with the cloud revolution, for example, you can rapidly prototype products, you can build them for browsers. So there, the feeling, it's almost like that equation's flipped today where most things seem like they're buildable and whether you should or not. So what sort of things are difficult to build?
Michael, you're exactly right. If you're just building a simple application, the application could be large and would apply to many people, but simple from a computer science perspective, there is no technical risk in that. We've been building programs for 40, 50 years now. We know how to build applications, whether you're doing it in a traditional on-premise architecture or these days in the cloud, etc. That's not where technical risk is. Technical risk typically comes in when you're trying to solve something which is hard to do technically. Let me give you a couple of examples nobody has solved before. We came along. So I have a company called vFunction. What we can do at vFunction is take an existing legacy Java program that you are running on premise and automatically break it up into a small number of individual separate programs, cloud native, running in the cloud on Kubernetes, on Docker, etc., where you are now getting all the benefits of the cloud, things like auto scaling, disaster recovery, etc. And the key word in my whole sentence was automatic. People have been doing this manually right now. It's a multi-year, multi-million-dollar process. Exactly. And vFunction can do it automatically. So that's one example. Robust intelligence. We have some of the best technology for adversarial AI in the world. PhD from Berkeley, professor from Harvard who started Robust Intelligence. I was very fortunate to be the first investor. By the way, I'm the first investor in all my companies. So I focus on that highest risk, very, very early stage when it's really just two engineers with an idea.
Very interesting. Well, that's probably a good segue, which is what do you look for in founders or a venture? Aside from, I think we understand your thesis around technical risk. So maybe if we focus on the founder, like what is it about the founder that motivates you?
Yeah, so just like any other VC, I'm looking for some things like large markets, high barriers to entry, capital efficiency, etc. So those are sort of standard items that every VC looks for. In addition to that, I'm looking for an unusual technical insight, which could be built by a small two-pizza team, 5 people, 10 people in a room in about a year or two. So I'm looking to be at the cutting edge of technology, but not taking science risk. And that's an art. So you don't want to be so commoditized that anyone can build it. You also don't want to be right in the R&D stage where you're taking science risk and you don't even know whether you'll be ready in 2 or 3 years to go to market. Venture has short timelines. I want a product in market. We've got to build a company, hopefully take it all the way to a nice exit or an IPO in less than 10 years. So you only have so much time to make that happen.
And that's such an interesting distinction. So like you've divided it up between technical risk is different than science risk.
That's exactly right. And a little bit of that is, the differentiation is in the eye of the beholder. And I would argue that it's my job is to actually make that distinction. And I don't always get it right. Sometimes I get it wrong. That's the nature of venture capital. But if you have an idea in the software realm where you believe you can, solve an interesting commercial problem in a year or two, that is of the most interest to me. And I actually believe that is an underserved part of the venture capital market.
Yeah, that sounds very unique. So that's really interesting that you've made that distinction. I can't think of another VC that is investing along that lines. I'm sure you know them, but I have not met them yet. So.
Well, actually, it's not so unique. What's really unique about what I'm doing is the stage at which I start. Almost all my companies work with traditional Sandhill, classic names that you've heard of. I have 4 companies with Sequoia Capital, 2 with Lightspeed, 1 with Norwest, 1 with Wing, 1 with Sutter Hill, just standard traditional venture capital firms who have all followed me in my investments. So in many ways, these are the same type of companies that a classical Sandhill VC would invest in. They're just a little bit earlier than they would start working with them.
That makes sense. So you're kind of a feeder system into some of these companies that getting them ready so that you can move them on up to Lightspeed investment.
I prefer the word leader over feeder, but they're both accurate.
All right. So if you could offer founders only one piece of advice, what would that be?
Follow the money. Founders, my mentor, Catherine Gould, she used to say venture is simple, but not easy. Founders tend to overcomplicate the problem. They overthink the issue and sometimes get lost because of that. Venture startups doing these are essentially simple ideas are the ones that succeed. Simple companies are the ones that become big, but it's not easy to do that. So don't confuse simple with easy. The opposite of simple is complicated. In other words, don't make your life complicated. Keep it simple and then you can succeed. And if you can't figure it out and you can't express it in simple ways, then I think you may have a deeper issue that you need to resolve first.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I see often people designing products or businesses that are almost like a Swiss Army knife and they can't settle on the one thing that someone will focus on. So that is actually excellent advice, I think.
Yeah, I mean, look at the launch of the iPhone. Steve Jobs was obviously an amazing product guy. And, he just kept repeating 3 things over and over again, right? That's all he was trying to do with the original launch of the iPhone, which is today arguably one of the most successful products in history. So you really, really have to have something that is that simple to describe. Doesn't mean it's easy to build. iPhone was not easy to build by far, but it was simple to describe what he was trying to accomplish.
I love it. Okay, so what role in the ventures that you've invested in or in your own engineering capital venture have community or partnerships been in the success of those?
Community and partnerships play a critical role in all of my companies. Because we are so deeply technical, we are often partnering and working with other companies in the ecosystem. We are coming earlier stage in that. No company stands as an island. We all stand on the shoulders of giants. That's what makes us look tall. And so all of us are looking to partner both in terms of formal partnerships, but also informal partnerships. The informal community where conversations take place are critical. So absolutely, they are an essential part of the success of my companies and more broadly of Silicon Valley. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I believe that the physical space of Silicon Valley, not just the concept of Silicon Valley, but the physical space of Silicon Valley is so important. People have been talking about the demise of Silicon Valley for a long time. I don't believe that's going to happen. Yes, we will have success in other areas, but physically this space between San Francisco and San Jose, it has a certain critical mass. There is a community, there are a set of people over here which are essential to what makes them so successful.
I think I agree with you, because I see, we do a lot in Austin. We're seeing a startup ecosystem pop up in Miami. But when you get down into the weeds of, both those and other hot markets, that DNA of cooperation, I think, is missing. And I don't know if it's patient, but, not afraid capital.
Wow, that's an interesting dimension, because I believe you can build a great company anywhere today. It's not that it's impossible to build a company somewhere else. That is not true. However, there are a unique set of advantages you get by being over here. Remember, this is a place that's incredibly expensive. The traffic is horrible. Our politics is arguably somewhat dysfunctional. So there's a lot that's working against you when you're working in a space like this. But still, there are a unique set of advantages that you get. And if they are playing to the strengths of the company that you're trying to build, then yes, this is the best place in the world to be. The World Championship for startups is played in Silicon Valley. There's no question about that.
True.
So that's where you have to be if you want to play. This is where there are world-class people in terms of employees, lawyers, partners, business development, sales, marketing, engineering, et cetera, all within miles of each other. And you can make amazing things happen.
I love it. Ashmeet, thank you so much for spending time with me. A couple of quick things to wrap up with. First, how do people get in touch with you, or is there anything you'd like to promote?
If you are thinking of starting a new company, you think you've solved an interesting problem that nobody else has as an engineer, give me a call. I would love to write you your first check. Easiest way to reach me is my website, www.engineeringcapital.com, or through LinkedIn or Twitter. I'm available on all of them. Please reach out.
I love it. We will include all of those in the show notes. Thank you, Ashmeet, so much. The last thing is that when we have interesting people on the Form Your Own Pack podcast, we like you to nominate other interesting people. We typically talk to founders or investors in scalable startups. So who would you, Ashmeet, like to nominate as a future guest of the podcast?
Depends on what area that you want to do research in or what you want to work on. Okay. For me, some of the most interesting things are actual practitioners of technology who have tried to solve problems in new ways. So for example, a short while back, I was talking with Neil Hunt, who used to be the VP of engineering at Netflix. Wow, he's got an amazingly interesting perspective on where there are some amazing opportunities in startup land. And I think he would make a great speaker.
And it's Neil, right?
Neil, yes, Neil, Neil Hunt.
Perfect. That is a wonderful nomination. So Neil, you've been nominated as a future guest. Ashmeet, thank you so much. We look forward to connecting you in the future, and we will stay in touch and follow your journey with Engineering Capital.
Thank you, Michael. It's been a pleasure.